But today we're kicking off a new series as we enter this Christmas season. And it's a series that I think is based on something that all of us like. Because I think most people, most all of us, like a good story, right? We like to be a part, we like to hear. If you have kids at home right now and it's Christmas time and there's Christmas books out, they grab their favorite Christmas story book and they bring it up to your lap. My 4-year-old daughter climbs up in my lap and we have read the same Christmas book 40 times in 3 days this weekend after we decorated because it's a good story. She likes the story. Now, not all stories are good. She doesn't pick the books, that you're like, who wrote this Christmas story? This is really weird, She doesn't pick those. She picks the ones that are good, just like we do. And so this morning I thought just for fun, just to help us wake up a little bit, overcome the Thanksgiving dinner that we ate, we're going to vote here on some stories, whether we think they are a good story or not. So here's the first one. Do you think this is a good story or not? Yeah? Does anybody think this is a bad story? Oh, yeah, you're too embarrassed to admit it after you heard everybody cheer for it. What about this story? Is this a good story, Home Alone? Yeah, I love Home Alone. They kind of got worse. They kept making them. But this one was a good one. What about this story? This one's iffy. Frosty the Snowman. Good? Bad? Anybody? I hate this one. This one's... My kids are like, we've never seen Frosty the Snowman. I'm like, yeah, because it's terrible. What about this? And this is one of my favorites. White Christmas. I sing this a lot. Some of you are like, what is that, Mom and Dad? Who are those people? I make my kids sit down and watch it. It's like, 5 minutes in. They're like, Dad, can we please go do anything else? And what about this one? You got to like this story, right? Rudolph, the red-nosed reindeer. There's some weird characters in this story, I'm going to be honest. Not sure what was happening when the guy wrote this, but it's a good story, right? We like stories. And the older we get, I think the same is true of us. We still like stories. We still like a good story. And so much, I like stories so much that I'll even say when something bad happens, something goes wrong, sometimes I will say, or my wife will say to me, well, at least you've got a good story to tell. It's crazy that even in a bad moment, a good story to tell helps make it a little bit better. Good stories draw us in. They draw us into what is happening. And you may know a person, a family member, a coworker that plays this out in your life, right? You know that person in the office that you come in and people are gathered around them because they're telling a story and they have everybody's attention and you gather around and everybody's listening and they're excited about this story because this person can tell such a good story. The opposite is true too. You know the person that you see walking to you and you think, oh gosh, please don't have anything new to tell me, right? This story is going to take 45 minutes. It should take 2 minutes. They're the worst storyteller ever. It may actually be a decent story, but they're just horrible at telling the story. So you're just praying that they talk to somebody else. Maybe you've done this. You've been like, oh, hold on, I got a phone call, Your phone's not even powered on, you just mosey out. Because why? It's not because you don't like the person. It may be a good friend. It's because the story they're going to tell is not going to be a good story. So you don't want to listen to it. Throughout history, people have been drawn to stories, to good stories. And I think there's several things that make stories good. It could be that the story has value in your life, that the story has wisdom for you. You can learn something from it. Maybe it has humor. You like somebody who tells a story that has some humor in it. Maybe it has some suspense in it. It leaves you hanging and you want to listen and hear why it is. There's lots of reasons that a story can be good, but I think one of the things that makes a story good, a story that we are interested in hearing more of, is when we can see ourselves in the story. When we can relate to one of the characters in the story, when we can relate to the situation in the story. The story that makes you cry is the one that you're watching somebody else live out something you're experiencing, right? We see ourselves in those stories. We feel what they feel. We hope for what they hope for, and we are drawn into the story because we can relate. And that's what this series is about, the greatest story ever told. And so we're doing this series because we believe, in fact, I have experienced in my own life that I see myself, and I think you can see yourself in the greatest story ever told. Maybe you, as you think about it now, can see yourself in the story of Jesus' birth. Now, not as Jesus, okay? None of us are in that position, but other people that are in the lives of Jesus, the life of Jesus as he is born. We can see ourselves in those stories when we look at their place and their position and what they're going through and the struggles they have. We can identify with them, at least in part, right? In case of Mary, just some of her story we identify with. There's a lot of things that happen at this time of year as we enter into holiday seasons. But I think one of the things is also found in this greatest story, and that's waiting. We don't like to wait, do we? We don't like to wait in a drive-through. We don't like to wait on hold on the phone. We don't like to wait. We are impatient people. We do not like to wait, and yet we've all experienced waiting. And especially in this season, because what's happening right now is you're having office parties, you're having parties in your classroom, you're having parties with family or with neighbors, and those things are good. But you're doing all of those things while you what? Wait for Christmas. Those things are leading up to, those things are in preparation for getting ready for Christmas. And for some of you, you're still kids at heart, and you are waiting on Christmas morning. You still love that. You're still anticipating Christmas. You may only get one gift, and it may not be that good, but you're excited and you're waiting. Some of you, you've gotten a little older and grumpier, but maybe you can remember the day where you were waiting for Christmas morning. You were excited about that day, and you waited. And there's good waiting and there's bad waiting. And you know this, you've experienced both. You've experienced good waiting, you've experienced bad waiting. I remember in the military when I would come home from a 6-month or a 12-month deployment, and we would be on the plane and we would land back at home. And I knew that my wife was waiting outside of that plane, like we were just a few minutes away from exiting the plane and being able to see her for the first time in a year. Like, that's good waiting. I know what's about to happen. I was excited for that. And what about the waiting? How many of you like water parks? Any water park people in here? And some of you are like, that's the most disgusting place in the world. Ooh, don't shake my hand after this. Well, what about the water slide? You know, the one that you walk on and it's got the floor that just drops out from under you? I mean, that's just waiting, isn't it? Like, you walk out, they tell you to cross your arms, you know, and you kind of do this number, you know, like you pin and then you cross and you pin, and you're waiting for that door to fly open, for you to fall to your death, into the pool below you. It's just waiting. What about, and that's good waiting. You're excited about it. In fact, we know it's good waiting because nobody is forced in there. In fact, people have paid money to go out there and be terrified in that waiting. So it's good waiting. But what about this waiting when a police officer pulls you over? Not that that's happened to any of you in here, but the earlier service, it happened to some of them. There was no earlier service. This is a joke. And they pull you over and they come up and you know, let's just be honest, we lie to them. We don't know how fast. I have no idea how fast. We know exactly how fast we were going. I have no idea, officer, but I'm sure it was below the speed limit. And they get our information and they go back to their police car. And what do? You wait. And is it good waiting? No, it's terrible waiting, right? Because they're back there scrolling social media or eating lunch or whatever. It's like, there's no way your computer takes that long to pull up my ID, okay? And then they come back, you've been waiting. That's bad waiting. We do not like bad waiting. What about being called to the principal's office at school? I've heard about this. I don't know. But to the best of my knowledge, that usually doesn't happen because the principal wants to tell you that you're just an amazing student, right? It's usually because they have some bad information for you, some bad news for you because of something you have done. I was with my friend. That's bad waiting. I was with my friend once in a car driving, and his wife called, and it came over the speakerphone in the car. And he said, hello, just nice, polite. And this is how she opened the conversation. Honey, you're going to kill me. And I remember wanting to crawl out of the car. Oh gosh, this is getting awkward right now, and in that moment, it was silence. He didn't know how to respond, the right response is, honey, I would never. But he was obviously thinking well, there are some things that you could have done that may lead down that path, And so there's just a pause, and we're just waiting. He's waiting for her to follow up with, you're going to kill me, because whatever she had done. There is bad waiting. We all experience waiting, good and bad. It's not new. People have been waiting since the beginning of time. And in fact, the greatest story ever told, we like to jump to Jesus being a baby in a manger into our New Testament. We like to begin there, but the greatest story ever told actually begins with people waiting. We're going to be in Isaiah chapter 9. Isaiah is in your Old Testament. It's about halfway through your Bible. If you don't have a Bible, we have some in the lobby. It's our gift to you. We have it on the screens as well. But we're going to begin the greatest story ever told in really a not so great place. We're going to start with people who were waiting because I think maybe you can see yourself in their story, as I often do. So we're going to be in Isaiah. Let me catch you up on what's happening. You got to follow here. There's a little bit of history, but it's really important here. The nation of Israel. So if you've been with us over the last few years, you've heard us talk about the nation of Israel. They were a people in Egypt who were slaves. They came out. They were led by Moses. They go into the promised land. They form a nation. Eventually, they want to have kings rule them like the nations around them. And so they are given kings. And their first king is King Saul, and then David, and then Solomon. That's about a 300-year short history of Israel. Those are their kings, Saul, David, and then Solomon. And they ruled as one kingdom during that time. Then after that, after Solomon, it is split into two nations. So the nation of Israel is split into what's called the northern tribe, and they kept the name Israel. And then the southern tribe, and they kept the name the southern kingdom, and they kept the name, or they started with the name Judah. So now you have the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. The northern kingdom is still called Israel. The southern kingdom is called Judah. And so our story picks up with two nations, each with their own king, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. It's about 200 years into them having two separate kingdoms. And the southern kingdom is who we're really going to look at today, is at a pivotal point in their history. Because what's going on is the Assyrian Empire is dominating the world. They are taking over other nations throughout the world. And the northern kingdom had partnered with a nation around them, the nation of Aram, to kind of come together as a coalition to help push back, to help be ready to fight against the Assyrians. But they knew how strong and how tough the Assyrian army was. And so the northern kingdom goes to the southern kingdom. They go to Judah, and they ask the king of the southern kingdom, his name is Ahaz. They say, hey, we need you to join our alliance. We need you to join with us so we can push back, we can fight against the Assyrians. But Ahaz, the king of the southern kingdom, doesn't do it. And so the northern king thinks, well, if he won't do it on his own, I'll make him. And so the northern kingdom of Israel attacks the southern kingdom of Judah, and they have a war. And Judah repels them. Judah, the southern kingdom, fights off the northern. They separate. The war is over. Then a few years later, the northern king comes back to Ahaz, the king of Judah, and asks him once again, hey, listen, the Assyrians are coming. They're going to attack us. We need to be on the same side. And again, the southern kingdom, Ahaz, says, no, I'm not going to do it. And this time, the king of Judah, Ahaz, decides that he's going to outsmart the northern king because he's thinking, last time you asked me and I said no, you attacked me. So he's thinking that's going to happen again. And so this time he actually goes to the king of Assyria and he says, hey, listen, if you will not attack me and you will protect me and Judah, the southern kingdom, from the northern kingdom, I'll pay you money every year and you can act as our defender. And that's exactly what he did. And the Assyrians began to act as the protectors of the southern kingdom. And in the middle of all of this, there's a man by the name of Isaiah. He's a prophet. Now, if you don't know what a prophet is, this is before they had God's word like we do. And so God to the nation of Israel would speak to prophets, and then the prophet would speak to the king and speak to the nation and tell them what God had said. And so Isaiah is speaking to the southern kingdom. He's talking to Ahaz, and he's telling him that he needs to trust God for his provision. He needs to trust God for his safety. He needs to trust in God for all of that, not the Assyrians. He's saying, don't go deal with the Assyrians. That is not who God wants you to find your safety and your provision in. It seems like there's hope to be found with the Assyrians, but there won't be hope. Isaiah tells him this. And so, of course, what does Ahaz do? He ignores the prophet and does what he wants to do. He makes a deal with the Assyrians. And Isaiah comes back to him and tells him, because of that, because of your trust in the Assyrians instead of God, Judah will be destroyed. So Ahaz thinks he has solved the problem, but in reality, he has caused disaster and chaos to come to Judah, because Isaiah tells him, yes, you will be destroyed by the northern kingdom or by the Assyrians, but your destruction is coming. And that's exactly what happens. Eventually, Assyria comes and destroys the northern kingdom. They take it over. They take them into captivity. And then, even though they were getting money from the southern, they decided, you know what? Let's just take it over too. And so they roll into the southern kingdom and take it over as well. And Isaiah 8, if you read it, is the gloom and doom that is coming to Judah. Not that it might happen, that it could happen, but that this will happen. Isaiah is saying this is what is going to happen. It's a horrible future that Isaiah paints for Judah and Ahaz. And then he says in Isaiah chapter 1, one of the most amazing things you ever hear after hearing bad news. He says this in Isaiah chapter 1. Here's the first word, nevertheless. That's how he begins, Isaiah chapter 9, nevertheless. And we can't miss the significance. This is a really important word here. Isaiah says, your nation is going to be overrun. You're all going to be taken as slaves or killed. Nevertheless. He's saying, don't worry. That's not a word we use a lot today, right? When's the last time you used the word nevertheless? I think we should start using it more. You should try to use it this week in conversation. Toss in the word nevertheless. We don't use it much today. Imagine us hearing the worst news ever. We would then follow it with however or but. Like that's how we would approach it. But imagine hearing the worst news ever, then followed by that word however. It goes like this for us, maybe when you were a little kid and you deserved a spanking and your mom or dad called you in the room and said, here's what you did wrong and you should get a spanking, but. Right? You don't hear anything else that they say. You're just like, oh, there's a chance. Right? I'm getting out of this one. They're giving me some hope. Right? They could have said, you deserve a spanking nevertheless. Right? And you just said, huh? What's that mean? It means however. Or when you grow up, you're older, your team's playing in the big game, and it's at the end of the game, the other team scores the touchdown, and it seems like all hope is gone. There's only a few seconds left on the clock. But then you hear the announcer say, wait a minute. And there's a flag on the play. He's announcing. He's saying they scored the touchdown. However, right? And what's it do? It begins to give you some hope. Nevertheless is a sweet, sweet word when it follows bad news, because here's what he says. Nevertheless, the gloom of the distressed land will not be like that of the former times. Nevertheless, he's saying, this is not where it ends. Isaiah gives hope. And really, we're going to see in just a minute, he gives a complete hope. He gives the same hope to them that he gives to us today in our lives, in our middle of our trials and pain and suffering. It's the same hope for us when we are waiting like the Israelites were. We can see ourselves in this hope in the rest of the story. Let me show you what I mean. Here's where they see hope first in verse 2. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. A light has dawned on those living in the land of darkness. The dark causes fear, doesn't it? Like there's just something about the dark. It makes us a little more uncomfortable. Kids don't like the dark, even in a familiar place. If it is dark, they don't want to go there. They don't want to be a part of it. Even as adults, Halloween, not too long ago, they have haunted houses. They don't have the corn maze at 1 p.m., do they? It's at night. It's got to be dark. If it's during the day, you just walk through it like, oh, yeah, it's not too bad. There's corn everywhere, a weirdo in a mask over there. You're not scared. It's the dark that is added to the situation that scares you. When I was a kid, I lived way out in the country in Kentucky, and there was an old cemetery. And I remember we would walk through it all the time during the day, going to each other's house. And it never bothered us. But at night, we would go down there and we would dare each other to go sit in the middle of the cemetery and see who could stay the longest. And the longest was like 3 seconds. Nobody ever stayed. And the only difference was day and night. The only difference was there was darkness. And there's seasons of our life, and it may be big, it may be little, that it just feels like there's darkness. And Isaiah in this story shows how important our relationship with God is because he meets us in times of darkness. God is not absent from us when we are in times of darkness, in seasons of waiting. We see it first in our spiritual lives. Sometimes there's a real sense of a spiritual darkness in our lives, meaning that we are living as though there's not meaning in our lives. We have a little bit of a mindset of we are born, we live, and then we die. Like, what's the importance of it? And yet Isaiah says to you, says to me, if you are in that spiritual darkness, that part of the greatest story ever told is that in our darkest moments, God still meets our spiritual needs. And God is not waiting for you to solve that spiritual darkness. He is not telling you to have that spiritual battle yourself. He is there with you. He says, Isaiah says, there's a light and there's safety. We know this in light. There's hope in light. In the darkness, we look for hope. We look for light. And Isaiah told the people, he told this country that they're going to be destroyed, but you still have a spiritual hope. There is still light in this dark world, and the same is true for us. And I don't know what you walked in here with, but I know that the holiday season, the Christmas season, isn't the same for everybody. For some, it's a great time. For some, it's a horrible time. For some, it's a time of joy and celebration. For some, it is a time of sadness and darkness. I don't know what you walked in here, what spiritual battles you're facing, but I know this is true, that in and through a relationship with God, there is spiritual hope no matter where you are right now. In the middle of our darkest hour, there is a light, there is hope, and that's part of the greatest story ever. And if that's all there was to the greatest story ever, is that God is with us in spiritual darkness, that there is a light, there is hope to be found in him, that would be enough. But that isn't all there is. Isaiah keeps going. He gives us more hope in verse 3. He says, you have enlarged the nation and increased its joy. The people have rejoiced before you as they rejoice at harvest time and as they rejoice when dividing spoils. I like Isaiah. Isaiah knows what brings joy. Good food and presents. That's what he's saying, right? Hey, there's joy like when you get good food and presents. I love a good restaurant. I'm excited about a good meal. I traveled with a guy before. We were on like a stipend. Somebody was giving us money to eat. And every time we went to eat, he wanted to go to Kentucky Fried Chicken. Now, I'm from Kentucky, and I'm glad there's a restaurant named after us. But I was like, dude, I'm not eating Kentucky Fried Chicken, man. I'm not even paying for this meal. Let's go eat somewhere good. He wanted Kentucky Fried Chicken. It got to the point I would sit in the booth with him while he ate his KFC, and then we would go somewhere else for me to eat some real food. I love good food. Isaiah talks about that here. He says that there can be joy found in suffering, in hardship, in waiting, just like this nation had experienced back when they had plenty of food, when they had plenty of things, of gifts, of presents, of things in their life. He says you can still have that joy. Because what he knows is this. Isaiah says in our waiting, God meets our emotional needs as well, not just our spiritual needs. He's not just there for us spiritually, but he's also there for us emotionally, right? When things have not been the best, but in a relationship with God, we're able to find joy. The New Testament says that in him we find a joy that doesn't make sense. Paul says you will find a joy in your relationship with Jesus through God that doesn't make sense to others. And that's what Isaiah is saying is, hey, back when we had plenty of food and we had plenty of stuff and joy was abundant, we're about to go through suffering in a dark time, and we're still going to have that same joy. And the same is true for us when life is tough, and it will be for all of us. When we're in a season of waiting, it is through a relationship with God that we can still find joy. And listen, I get it. Those things are nice to have, a spiritual hope and an emotional hope, but we are practical people, aren't we? And so we still say, I'm still going through it. I'm glad he meets those needs, but it's still tough. But Isaiah offers another hope here in verse 4. He says this, For you have shattered their oppressive yoke and the rod on their shoulders, the staff of their oppressor, just as you did in the day of Midian. For every trampling boot of battle and the bloody garments of war will be burned as fuel for fire. Here's the picture that Isaiah is painting them, that he's giving them and us, is that one day God will meet our physical needs as well. Now listen, don't hear me say that it's going to be today or that it's going to be tomorrow. It may be. And I approach God and I pray to him for my physical needs as though he's going to meet that need right there. We're told in the New Testament Jesus says that he knows us and that as a good father, he knows what we need and that he gives good gifts. But it may not be right now. But God will meet our physical needs. He will provide for us at some point, whether now or in eternity. Physically, he meets our needs. And so, you look through this story that Isaiah is telling, and we find ourselves in it in one of two ways. We have to pay attention because we all fit into this story as one or two people. We're either King Ahaz, who was the king of the southern tribe, who said, I hear that the Assyrians are coming. I'm going to go to them and ask them to provide for me. Or Isaiah. Let's look at the king first. The king doesn't want to be attacked. He doesn't want to be overrun. And he's the king. I mean, who doesn't want that job? Like that's, if you could apply for any job, king's got to be at the top of the list. Life is good when you're the king. Nobody else gets to tell you what to do. You get to eat whatever you want to do. They clear the roads for you. You don't have traffic jams anymore when you're the king. I'm assuming. I've never been a king. I'm assuming this is how it works, that it's good to be the king. But even the king, when he's told about the future that is coming, he is worried. He's anxious. He's upset about it. And he does what often we do. He didn't wait for God to solve the problem. He took it upon himself because after all, he's the king. And kings can do those types of things. Kings can solve their own problems no matter how bad it looks. They can figure something out, and that's what Ahaz does. He saw the darkness. He saw the suffering that was coming, and he said, I'm going to solve this problem myself. And he looked at his future with no way out and no hope, and he carried that burden himself. But then Isaiah, he's not the king, so he already doesn't have it as good. Like just on the surface, if you could choose to be Isaiah or the king, we're probably all choosing the king, just on the surface. Isaiah doesn't have it as good. He sees the same darkness. He knows of the same destruction coming. He feels the same worry. And yet, Isaiah has an unbelievable outlook about his future. King Ahaz is hopeless and just distraught about his future. And Isaiah has an amazing outlook about his future. How did he have this hope for his future? Where he tells us in verse 6, he says, all of this is going to happen. But we have hope because a child will be born for us. A son will be given to us, and the government will be on his shoulders. And so Isaiah says, listen, it's about to get bad, boys. We're all either getting killed or we're going to become slaves of the Assyrians. And while you can look at that and be distraught and feel hopeless, I want to encourage you to look at it through a different lens because we have hope. Isaiah did what we need to do. We need to see our future through our faith. He didn't separate how he saw the present from his faith in God. It wasn't two different things. Instead, he looked at life through the hope of Jesus. And that's a huge difference in how he looked at life and how Ahaz looked at life. And just to help us out, he tells us a little bit about what he knows about Jesus. He says in verse 6, he will be named. So he begins to describe Jesus to us. You know how you get nicknames, right? You know how you get a name. You do something to earn that name, right? You do something. Michael Jordan became Michael Air Jordan because he could jump so high. Abraham Lincoln, I wasn't around then, but I've been told he got the nickname Honest Abe because he couldn't tell a right. He earned the nickname, right? There was a friend of mine in the Air Force. You get call signs for your job, and she got the call sign Scooby because when she laughed, she sounded like Scooby-Doo. She thought it was because she really liked Scooby-Doo. And we all said, no, it's because you sound like Scooby-Doo. And it stuck with her entire career. Her call sign was Scooby. That's what we called her. Hey, Scooby, come here. I need you to help. And she'd laugh her way over there. You earn a nickname. Listen to how Isaiah describes Jesus in the rest of verse 6. He says, and he will be named Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace. The dominion will be vast and its prosperity will never end. He will reign on the throne of David and over his kingdom to establish and sustain it with justice and righteousness from now on and forever. Do you understand the importance of those words to a nation that is about to be overthrown and attacked? Isaiah says, but just wait. Jesus is coming. He starts by saying he's a wonderful counselor. This is not a generic group counseling session. This is a personal counselor that we have the opportunity to invite into our lives who cares about us. He's not just a personal counselor. He says he's a mighty God who's in charge of everything. He's over everything. And I love this one most. He says he's an eternal. Some translations say he's an everlasting Father. So he goes from a wise mentor, a counselor, with someone that we're close with, to a mighty God, someone that we're maybe a little standoffish from because he's God and he feels like we can't approach him even though we can, but he's still in that position of God. But then he goes to, he's an everlasting Father, that he loves us. His love never ends. His love for you doesn't get less. And then he says he's a Prince of Peace. Isaiah started the description of this child, Jesus, as someone who would rule the nations, that the governments would be on his shoulders. And certainly at that time, can you imagine what he's saying? Even today, this seems like an audacious claim. But Jesus will rule the world with peace. So here's the point of starting a Christmas series like this. Life is not always rainbows and sunshine, is it? You know this. I know this. I'm not going to stand up here and tell you, hey, life is all, just come to church and life will be great. Because you know that's not true. I know that's not true. Isaiah knew that was not true. And so if we, in our moments of waiting, begin to be stressed because of family, because of finances, because of health, maybe things are not going right, and all we can do is wait. We just can't solve it. We can't figure this out on our own. Here's the question for us then, is how will we wait? How will you look through the waiting to your future? Will you do it like the king did? Will you let what you see, what you feel, what you experience, what's happening around you determine the choices you make? Will what you see and what you're worried about and what's causing you to stress, will that be what determines how we make decisions? Will every decision be, how do I push this back? How do I hold this off? How do I solve my problems? Or will we, like Isaiah did, find hope in our waiting because we see our future through our faith in Jesus? And sometimes that's really difficult. And sometimes we have to force ourselves to stop and view things differently while we wait. And sometimes your joy and your spiritual needs and your physical needs are viewed through the lens of God's promises instead of through your present circumstances. Sometimes in our waiting, instead of just looking at the circumstances around us, we have to look at God's promises. We have to do like Isaiah did and look to the future hope of Jesus. And we have to be reminded of who Jesus is and who we are in him. And if we want this to be how we wait with hope, first off, we have to know Jesus. And I don't mean know about him. We have to have a personal relationship with him. Without a personal relationship with Jesus, there is no hope in him. It is through our relationship with him that it changes how we wait. We begin to see him as our counselor. We see him as God, as a deeply loving Father who is with us in the waiting. And when we know that, when our faith is founded in that understanding, then while we wait, and all of us will wait at points in our lives, we will see tomorrow, we will see our future differently. Because here's what will happen. If we are founded in looking towards Jesus in the middle of our days, good or bad, we will focus less on our story and focus more on the story of Jesus. We'll focus less on how do we fit Jesus into our story and more on how do we fit into his story, because his story is the greatest story ever told. Because in his story, in Jesus' story, is where you and I and our community and our neighbors and our family and our coworkers, that and that alone is where we find hope. So I want to leave you with one question today to think about. In a season of waiting, do you focus more on you or more on God? when we are waiting, when we are at the precipice of a dark season in our lives, when we are waiting, we don't have answers, we would like answers, do we look at our life more? Do we focus on ourselves more? Or do we focus more intently on who God is and who He has promised to be? Because there is a difference. There is a difference, and your life will be lived and experienced so differently when you focus on the greatest story ever told, the story of Jesus, as opposed to our own stories. Let me pray for us. God, we love you and thank you for who you are, and thank you for this story, the birth of Jesus. And as we get into it the next few weeks and see more of the greatness of this story, may we first begin by acknowledging that life is not always lived on the mountaintop. Life is not always full of highs and winds. There is lows, there are valleys, there is suffering, there is heartache, there is pain. But as the psalmist says, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, you are with me. God, may we be reminded that the greatest story ever told is that in Jesus we have hope for tomorrow. We have joy for today, but we can look for tomorrow with hope because of His work. So I pray for anyone here today who has not given their life to Jesus, that they would do so today. That they would enter into a relationship by confessing that they are a sinner, that they need a Savior, that they believe that Jesus died on the cross for them, and because He lived a perfect life, He paid the full price for our sin. And that He rose again, and it's through that defeat of sin and death that we can have a relationship with Jesus and a relationship with God, our Creator. And then for those who have already made that decision, God, I pray that we would be Isaiahs and not Ahaz. That in the middle of a challenge and a tough decision, we would not take it upon ourselves to figure life out, but that we would constantly turn to your word and we would turn to you in prayer, and we would say, God, in this season of waiting, you tell me what to do. I'm going to continue looking to you and to your Son where I find hope. We love you and thank you. It's in your name we pray. Amen.